Hi everyone, this is the third part of a screencast for Independent Colleges Dublin for CIMA E2, looking at themes or possible themes for November 2014. So we've got the last 5 here that I've chosen, and this first one here is not an uncommon theme, probably examined every 1 or 2 years or thereabouts, this idea of corporate social responsibility. So in the first instance, I just think that the definition is important. You know, the idea of corporate social responsibility being the minimization of the negative impact upon society and the environment and indeed all stakeholders, and the maximization of the positive impact on those parties and obviously the environment. So that definition is important. In terms of how the examiner could go with this, I think the 2 key views on this area of CSR are the first area that we should look at, just that idea of the shareholder view versus the stakeholder view. So the shareholder view obviously has an interest in maximizing returns or profits or wealth maximization for shareholders. The stakeholder view is that broader view that everybody's important and that the organization should take account of environmental needs, social needs, and indeed all stakeholders. Okay, so over and above that key distinction between those 2 sorts of views, I think looking at costs associated with being a corporate, a good corporate citizen is important. What sort of costs would a company incur? You know, perhaps costs in terms of minimizing waste, looking at disposal, perhaps pollution. CO2 emissions, etc. So a variety of possible costs, and really what the shareholder view says, you know, Friedman's view, the business of business is business, that those costs are a little bit of a waste of time. So incurring those costs really doesn't make sense. And what a company should be doing is just focusing on maximizing returns. Obviously, the shareholder view is that wider view. Everybody is important. The environment's important. People, planet, and profits are all classic 3-point idea there. Okay. Now, in terms of other aspects of CSR, I think that Carroll and Buchholz's 4 stages of good corporate citizenship are important, and you remember that they are very simply the sort of economic responsibility, or a company adhering to its economic responsibilities, such as, you know, paying suppliers and paying employees, moving up to legal, which is essentially compliance with law. I guess both of those would be sort of gimmies in one sense, and then from that point on, really moving on to sort of ethical responsibilities, or being a good ethical person, or person with good ethics, or an organization with good ethics. We remember that ethics are simply, you know, the difference between right and wrong, and really what we're saying in that instance is, if a company decides that it wants to take on its ethical responsibilities, then it's going to act fairly in relation to all parties and show a good moral sense. Over and above that, Carroll suggests that philanthropic responsibilities are the sort of high-end level, and really what we're talking about there is sort of things like charitable donations, etc. So really that's the high end. So I think in terms of possible themes, I think outside of the key definition, we've got to look at shareholder versus stakeholder, and then we have to look at perhaps Carroll and building in that different levels of responsibility that an organization could take, with perhaps the first 2 being what you would expect of any given organization. Okay. Second one here is SWOT. Smaller area, although, you know, we could see a question that asks for a SWOT analysis of some kind. We'll be familiar that SWOT obviously is a standalone model, but also can be used within the rational process, or is often used within the rational process. Strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. You know, strengths and weaknesses are to some extent sort of internal issues. You know, what we're good at and what we're not good at, opportunities and threats, perhaps external items, possibly future items or things on the horizon that we're a little bit concerned about or that we're quite happy about, sort of opportunities for growth, etc. So in terms of how that might come up, in a pretty straightforward fashion, I would expect, just along the lines of the headings, a long scenario, perhaps detailing a variety of issues in relation to the company, and perhaps a definition of SWOT being required, and essentially it's just a corporate appraisal tool that enables a company to look at itself both internally in terms of the S and W and perhaps externally in terms of the O and the T. Okay. Next one here is leadership theories, and again, this is a very, very common topic. I would say possibly the most common out of these 5. And in terms of leadership theories, you'll probably be confused by the variety and volume of them. I think that there's 1 or 2 that are more usable than others. I think that in terms of an answer, I think Ashrid's model or Tannenbaum and Schmidt's model is the one that I'd be inclined to go for, and obviously make sure that you build in some key phrases such as sort of boss-centered or employee-centered or organizations. Having a good fix on the idea of tells and sells and consults and joins and exactly what they mean, and also in particular looking at the sort of advantages and disadvantages of each of those elements. I mean, very often they relate to speed perhaps, or how quickly things can be put into place. So, for example, consults is quite a quick sort of philosophy for a leader, or indeed tells is also quite quick too. Okay, so in terms of leadership theories, I would say that those 2, Ashrid and Tannenbaum and Smith, are the ones to go for. Make sure you build in enough buzzwords associated with that sort of overall continuum. It seems to me to sort of go from sort of one side to the other. We're either going to have some sort of autocratic situation, or possibly a more sort of democratic situation, perhaps employee-centered as opposed to boss-centered. So very often you'll get a comparison between the 2, or a company moving from one side to the other, possibly moving from sort of tells to joins. Okay, so that's really the way that leadership theories are going to go, and I'd make sure that you have a fix certainly on those 2 models, or possibly even Likert, which is a very similar model. Okay, next one here is just this idea of PEST, not dissimilar to SWOT, perhaps a little bit more common, more commonly examined than SWOT. PEST, we'll know that PEST is an environmental scanning tool, a model that we use to scan the environment, to really assess our situation and to assess the environment. Typical way for the examiner to come at this is a sort of a meaty scenario, I would have thought, and within that scenario some detail in relation to issues within the environment under these headings. So make sure you cover each one of them, make sure you give enough examples of the model itself, and really talk about what the model enables a company to do, which is essentially to scan areas in the environment that are relevant to them, perhaps in terms of their expansion into another country or into another industry perhaps. Okay, last one here, again back to Porter's value chain, quite a common model, maybe not as common as the diamond or possibly the 5 forces, but a good one to know. One of the problems here, obviously it's a little bit chunkier than the diamond or indeed the Porter's 5 forces. Obviously we have those support activities and indeed primary activities. I think it's important to know what each of them means, and it's important to get the terminology right as well. One of the things that you'll notice, or as a marker you notice within exams, is that a student just doesn't know all of the elements of a given model, i.e. PVC, or perhaps they do, but they get them confused with another model. So for example, very often you'll find porters, the value chain confused with the forces, which may well be confused with the diamond. So first port of call then is rote learning the elements. Now in terms of where he could go with Porter's value chain, I'd suggest that outside of a definition, in other words, it's simply a tool to analyze the internal workings or the internal activities of a business. Over and above that, I think that understanding how it can be used and how it's of benefit to an organization is important. And you remember from the Porter's value chain diamond, or Porter's value chain diagram even, that the margin is being pushed out on the right hand side. So essentially the PVC is used as a technique to increase efficiency, to increase profit, to increase competitive advantage. We're looking to make the organization more efficient. In terms of uses over and above that, perhaps the chain could enable us to combine activities, perhaps invent better ways to do things, or new activities, or possibly manage the linkages. Also remember that link into the idea of the value system. In other words, looking at the company's own value chain vis-a-vis the whole value system. And the value system is very much just a set of value chains of different companies with suppliers linking up with customers. So in effect, if we were to look at, say, outbound logistics within the PVC, we would see one company's outbound logistics becoming another company's inbound logistics. So those are the key things and the key buzzwords. Certainly activities and linkages between activities are important. You know, how the chain is used, and in particular, you know, just that ability to apply the Porter's value chain to a given question. And that's maybe the trickier bit of Porter value chain questions, being able to come up with enough points under each of the headings. Okay, so hopefully that's been helpful, and that's the last 5 in this C2 or sorry E2 themes screencast. Many thanks. Bye bye.